My name is Judy Smith. I am a professor. I'm a professor of American Studies at UMass Boston, and I've been in Boston since 1966 and have been I'm so thrilled that I was able to be the part of the women's movement in Boston. It totally shaped me and has changed my life, as so many other people. So I just feel so lucky that I got to be here and live through those years with many of you, live through, struggle, demonstrate, organize with many of you. I want to make one announcement before I introduce Linda, which is, I think, an announcement that's very relevant to the conference. We've been talking a lot about the sort of pre-history of women's liberation and how to kind of imagine women's liberation and think more broadly about its multiracial roots and different paths to women's liberation. And I've been working for many years with a Boston area filmmaker, Tracy Heather Strain, who just got a big NEH grant to do a documentary about Lorraine Hansberry. So in the next period, there will be a powerful documentary, pretty widely available, with the support of the miserable, miserly support of NEH, to tell the story of Lorraine Hansberry as the writer of an amazing play that's still in circulation, as a communist, as a lesbian, and as a big, deep thinker about women's situation, as an intellectual, as just a powerful person in so many ways. So I want everyone to go to Facebook and like the Lorraine Hansberry Documentary Project. That is the page where the announcements are going to be, and very soon we're going to have to do a fundraising campaign, because NEH, you have to match the money you get from them. You have to raise this other big chunk of money yourself. So there will soon be a Kickstarter campaign for the Lorraine Hansberry Documentary Project, and I really think it's going to be a fabulous resource for our organizing and our teaching. So I encourage you to keep your eye out for it. Okay, now to turn to the subject at hand. It is a special pleasure to introduce Linda Gordon to give the keynote for this conference. Linda asked me not to introduce her to you through listing her scholarly books and articles, and I will at least partly honor her request. But to introduce Linda Gordon is to confront the dazzling dialectic produced by what she brought to women's liberation, how it changed her, and how she has represented its political imagination. Before 1968, Linda Gordon was already a radical, shaped perhaps in part as the child of parents active in the rise of what the new left came to name as the old left. She was already a dancer, and she was already a brilliant history student, graduating with high honors from college and then entering a very intellectually demanding PhD program to study Russian history. She came to, after a year and a half in London, she came to Boston in 1968 to teach in her field in Russian history at the newly organized and experimental urban campus of the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Conceived as the opposite of the big state campus, UMass Amherst, with a downtown campus to be accessible to working people downtown, small classes, a priority on learning, not fraternities and sororities, as the highest form of social connection. Here, Linda became known as a formidable presence in the classroom, her department, and the faculty left caucus. Always thoughtful, politically sophisticated and insightful, always smart. Soon she would become a central part of the collective, putting out the left journal Radical America when it moved from Madison to the Boston area. And this Radical America was one of the pamphlets that we passed around, as people talked about all the pamphlets that we passed around. She brought these parts of herself with her when she encountered the ideas of women's liberation, and in 1969, 1970, became part of the newly organized Boston area formation, Bread and Roses. We thought at the time that understanding and analyzing the political, social, economic, and cultural forces that drove women's status and women's inequality would provide key to understanding the other aspects of social, racial, and economic inequality. We embraced women's liberation as part of what would make possible a truly just and humane form of social organization for everyone, men and women, parents and children. An autonomous women's organization would unlock creativity, women's ability to think for themselves, imagine new forms of leadership and solidarity. It wasn't about identity. It wasn't about choice. It was a path to a deeper, richer, more egalitarian form of social transformation. Even if these were only dreams, they had the power to redirect our imagination for ourselves. And so Linda Gordon, the Russian historian, joined a group with other women writing women's history, some of them often utilizing the resources of the Schlesinger Library, an institution which was in place because of the efforts of two prior generations of women committed to women's history and women's rights. Some of the other women historians were working on women in socialist organizing, on women's efforts to gain heretofore denied rights of citizenship, and on women's labor organizing in the US. Linda retrained herself through asking new kinds of questions emerging out of the insights of women's liberation, to research the history of women's bodily autonomy, reproductive practices, and moral rights in her book, then called Women's Bodies, Women's Rights. Path-breaking and widely read, taught and discussed all over the place, despite being ignored by the mainstream historical journals. She started to work with two other women to collect the documents for America's working women in order to teach women's history in a way that foregrounded women's labor, productive and reproductive. She was responsible for creating a course in women's history at UMass that blew her students' minds, and I know there are some of her students in the audience who I feel will give a shout out to that. It blew her students' minds and inspired many women who had not seen themselves as part of historical experience. She was part of a larger collectivity of women from Boston and New York that met to try to work out a new synthesis between Marxism and feminism, a long quest, but we put our efforts in on that would build on the richest analytic insights and liberatory potential from each. I won't list Linda's books, but I do want to say that Linda's commitments to radical analysis that considers the dynamic interrelationship between labor, class, political economy, moral economy, patriarchal power, family and household production and reproduction, migration, encounters with the state and especially the welfare state, structures of racialization, all these themes thread through all her scholarship, where she manages to hold in tension women's creativity, resilience, resistance, their efforts to be heroes of their own lives against the structures which contain and exploit women and mediate against women's autonomy and subjectivity. And I also want to say that the combination of her scholarship and her sustained commitment to teaching women's history has introduced generations of students to open these Pandora's boxes, from Massachusetts to Wisconsin to New York and beyond. At the time, we thought that women's liberation opened up new ways of looking at, understanding, and trying to change the world. Linda Gordon's political and historical practice exemplifies the force and the breadth of women's liberation's challenge to the world as it is, and helps us glimpse the possibilities of what might be. Thank you.
Well, I'm a little overwhelmed by that. This conference has, I think we all know, been a gift of inestimable value to everyone here. And I think I can speak for all of us in expressing an ocean of gratitude to Deborah Bell. Yes. We're also extremely grateful to a team of, I suspect, more than 25 people who put in uncountable hours of labor in pulling this all together, arranging the complex logistics of setting up and filming often 9 panels at a time, providing coffee and food, guiding us around a strange campus. I could go on and on. But I also know that that team came together in large part because of Deborah's skill, her generosity, and absolutely extraordinary commitment, despite some other heavy burdens. And so, on behalf of the Planning Committee, I want to ask Deborah to come up here, please, for a few presentations. This is for you. As well as this. But I'm going to wait while she opens it.
It says, for Deborah, a big bouquet of thank yous from the organizing committee. You're the best. With a heart. Thank you. I have to say, look inside.
I wanted her to open it.
Yes. Oh, signed. It's signed, too. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, my. It's a gift certificate for Bella Santé. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I will say, again, I have been given a great deal more credit than I deserve, and I think that my real accomplishment was simply saying yes when people had wonderful ideas, and I am grateful to all of you with those wonderful ideas. Thank you.
Well, that applause, I think, says it all. The very richness of this conference is making my task a little bit difficult. There are so much knowledge, intelligence, and passion gathered here that I am truly not sure, really, seriously, that I have anything new to say, particularly after listening this morning, furthermore, to my former Boston comrades, Tess Ewing and Demita Fraser. I realized that my take on feminism comes very much from my Bread and Rosie's experience, and I have only just begun to realize how very diverse and possibly quite different other people's experiences in this room are, but I will do what I can. Feminism Unfinished is a title that Astrid Henry thought up for the book that we have done together that will be published in the fall. So I just stole it for this. And some of what I have to say has been influenced by Astrid and our other collaborator, Dorothy Sue Cobble. And I'm extremely lucky to have been able to work with them on this project. Most people like this title, but a few people thought it was pessimistic because it made them wonder if feminism would ever be finished. Maybe not. It's quite possible, it seems to me, that we could forever be uncovering new aspects of the microaggressions of the gender system against women. And besides, we cannot possibly predict all of the creative ways that women, and some men, will find to agitate for a better world for women. But whatever the future holds, there's one thing I'm sure of, and that is that we have to operate with a capacious and open definition of feminism. We cannot assume that we know its boundaries. There were many feminisms in the 1970s and 1980s, and there are many feminisms today, and there are even some I have been forced to realize that we don't like. There are conservative feminists, there are homophobic feminists, there are even skinhead feminists, and they all mostly believe that they are working in women's interests. But more important, I think, is the many, many, many progressive feminisms that did not necessarily have the word feminism or women or gender attached to them. These feminisms have been located in unions, in civil rights campaigns, in campaigns against global warming, or for public schools, in the Clamshell Alliance, in the Young Lords. I could go on and on. We don't own feminism, and we don't have the authority to define which people are in and which people are out of it. The women's liberation movement was one moment, one version in a very long history of diverse feminisms. It may be, I feel of it as having been a high point, but there will probably be other highs. It too was diverse, but I do think that women's liberation, as that moment, had some core values. And these grew from both the, first, they grew both from the old left, but were also arrayed against the old left. In the 1930s, for example, the Communist Party was the only white-dominated group in this country to attack racism. And it was also the only political group of any kind, as Jenny Mansbridge pointed out, to criticize male dominance. But on the other hand, earlier in the 30s, before the establishment of the Popular Front in 1935, the Communist Party was involved in vitriolic attacks on any other part of the left that did not pay obedience to what it was doing, and that was a lesson that I think many people in the New Left took very seriously and wanted not to repeat. Our movement was, without any doubt, a part of the New Left, as Sarah Evans so eloquently and lucidly explained in her opening keynote. Even when we were cursing the sexism of other parts of the New Left, we were a part of it. We were in that family, whether we like it or not. I want to make it clear that when I say the New Left, I am referring actually to a very long stream of progressive activism. I would date it, to make it simple, to give it a clear starting date, from 1955, from the birth of the Montgomery bus boycott. And I do want to point out because there are people here who aren't historians and you don't get taught this in the schools, that the Montgomery bus boycott was organized by women, and that it was organized by women who came together to fight both sexism and racism because they came together inseparably in the experiences of Black women. And I consider the New Left a movement that continued all the way up through early gay liberation and the environmental movement. All these movements shared, I think, a certain utopian courage, a daring to dream about something entirely different as Monty Python might say. Like the whole New Left, the women's liberation movement envisaged a holistic transformation of our society and polity. Now, many of us here are veteran women's libbers, and some are even among its founders. But we all know that these are not credentials that entitle us to announce what should come next or to ask younger people to emulate us. But on the other hand, I've noticed that some of us, including me, can't stop trying. I think one of the things we need to recognize is that the feminism that started in the late 60s that we call women's liberation was the largest social movement in the history of the United States. Its accomplishments are really, truly breathtaking. And you understand that best when, if you are an older person like me, you're in a conversation with a younger person and understand how they can't even imagine some of the aspects of what our lives were like before this movement. But one of the accomplishments was that our rebellion was so broad. It was not an organization. It was so broad that all kinds of people in all walks of life, in all kinds of activities, could join it. It was very easy to join it. In one sense, all you needed to do was to say you were a feminist. But there were so many thousands of small little things that you could participate in. It was not only the largest movement, but I would argue in some ways the most open movement in American history, because it made it possible for all kinds of people to create little projects that served their own position and their own needs. Whether or not they articulated what we might call feminist theory, they were in fact subverting some of the oldest structures of domination in human history. This was a very, very radical movement. And so, naturally, the backlash against it has been extremely strong and extremely virulent. And when I say that backlash, I'm not just talking about the anti-abortion movement or the homophobes or the racists. I am talking about really just as we were part of the New Left, so the backlash is against the whole meaning of the whole New Left, and it is really impossible to separate out the different strands of this conservatism that we are facing. Understanding that it's a backlash is important, but it doesn't mean that we can slough it off without experiencing a lot of pain and a lot of rage. I thought Robin Spencer, who spoke in a panel yesterday, understood this very clearly when she spoke of the need to bring women's individual, emotional, unruly, personal experiences into the work that we do. Now, the extreme parts of this backlash, as you all know, make some very nutty allegations. They say that Obama is a Muslim. They say that Jews engineered 9/11. They say that in legitimate rape, women can't get pregnant, and you know I could just go on and on and on and on. They engage in a lot of name-calling, the purpose of which is to exile huge sectors of the American population from Americanism. I'm usually very cautious with words, but I have to admit that there have been moments when the word fascism has come to my mind. But when I step back, I think what I'm seeing is that for every one of these crazy allegations, they alienate more people than they win over. And I actually don't really think that these wingnuts are our most powerful enemy. Let me offer two reasons for saying that. The first is, let me talk about slut talk. There's been a lot of that recently, but let me point out there is nothing new here. Calling women sluts in various terms of phrase has been around seemingly forever, in part because it does work. To mention just some recent American times, when women first started to work in factories, they were called sluts. When they tried to wear practical and comfortable clothes, they were called sluts. When they demanded voluntary motherhood, they were called sluts. Perhaps the ugliest of these smears that I know of was the allegation that black women could not be raped because, of course, they were all sluts. Not in so many words, but we know that Anita Hill, that Hillary Clinton, that Joycelyn Elder, and no doubt many people in this room have been smeared in that same way. And I would point out some men, too, like the doctors, for example, George Tiller and Kenneth Edelin, just to mention a few people that I assume people here know about. Slut talk is a form of terrorism because by targeting a few, it aims to frighten and intimidate everyone. The women, for example, today who are so bravely contesting rape in India and Egypt and a lot of other places, they understand perfectly that it is a form of terrorism. But on the other hand, I'm not really sure it's working. I have not noticed a tsunami of virginity pledges or of young women who are willing to confine their sexual activity to when they want to get pregnant. I'm actually more concerned about issues within these feminisms because I've met a lot of people, a lot of very open-minded, progressive people who have become quite supportive or quite taken by the lean-in perspective. Even worse, and worse as a problem, is this idea that you see a lot in the media that this so-called lean-in perspective is what feminism is today. I'm sure everyone in this room could marshal a number of arguments about what's wrong with that lean-in perspective. First of all, it implies that women don't work hard enough. My own personal slogan, I want to say, is lean back. I do not want to work any harder or get more ambitious or aggressive. It implies that women should adopt male pattern aggressiveness. Furthermore, in its message that what women need to do is to learn to bargain and negotiate harder, can you seriously imagine a woman who works at Walmart finding it effective to be a tough negotiator about her job? But I want to consider the lean-in motif in relation to one woman who is, I think, a heroine for a lot of us, and that is Wendy Davis. When the New York Times published a very snarky article about her titled something like, "Can Women Have It All?" many women wrote letters of protest to the New York Times. But actually, the most thoughtful letter published, in my opinion, was by Victoria Bissell-Brown, a historian from Grinnell College. And her letter was critical not of the Times, but of Wendy Davis. And you may think this is wrong-headed, but I want to read you just a little bit from what Vicki Brown wrote. She's talking not so much about the article, but about the whole story that Wendy Davis puts out as her biography. What's stunning, I'm quoting now, is that Wendy Davis chose to fluff up her bio by endorsing the conservative notion that we achieve success all on our own as scrappy individuals. Davis missed a great opportunity to tell the world, I got to go to Harvard because my ex-husband and my mother took care of my kids. Every female voter would understand that. And that is true, and that is a real problem. In other words, Wendy Davis did not simply lean in, and if that were all she did, I don't believe that she would be a lawyer, let alone a candidate for governor. Or is it senator? I'm sorry. In her case, help came from relatives, but it also came from the achievements of several centuries of feminisms. It was those feminists who forced universities to admit women, who forced the bar to let women be lawyers, who forced the electoral system to admit women and the political system to admit them to the legislatures. It is a boring word, but it may be the most important, the system. I want to call this notion that Wendy Davis succeeded all on her own because she leaned in, I want to call it, just for shorthand, a corporate feminism, a corporate feminist analysis. In our economy, the greatest delusion is that individuals can rise through merit and hard work and networking, and that those who have succeeded, therefore deserve their success. And please note, this is a circular argument. You advance through personal merit, and if you have advanced, that proves that you had personal merit. Anyone who's been a teacher knows how many young people actually believe this. And I think it is one of the main cultural weapons of the corporate class. And it is constantly, very particularly used, or in several elaborations, in particularly racist ways to explain the racial stratification of our society. I live in the headquarters city of that class now. And if I want to go to see the ballet, I have to go to the Koch Theater. And if I need medical care, I have to go to the Langone Hospital. I don't know, for some of you New Yorkers might not know who he is, but he's the owner of, what do you call it? Not Office Depot, but Home Depot, right? A real arch conservative. So maybe that I'm more conscious of that class of people than people who don't live in New York. But I actually think there's plenty of evidence out there, not compiled by me, but by other people, that the wingnuts of the extreme right are being built and used by this corporate class. I actually do have a class analysis of the main thing that has happened since the peak of the women's movement. I think the main trend has been the largest ever redistribution of resources from the poor to the rich, with the upper middle class getting just enough to live comfortably. I heard Kiara Bridges argue that racism was rational, and I think the same of the corporate agenda. It's quite rational, even if underneath it there's a very profound irrationality about the long-term future of the whole world. They are consciously attempting to create an entirely unregulated economy and a mass of potential workers so desperate for jobs, so unprotected by unions, that they cannot resist because, unfortunately, they want to eat. I'm not denying that plenty of Tea Party types feel very strongly and quite independently of corporate priorities. There are a lot of people who just absolutely cannot stand the idea that there is a black president. There are a lot of people who sincerely believe that God condemns homosexuality, or for that matter, any sexuality for the sake of pleasure. But whether they know it or not, they are serving another agenda, which I see as this overweening corporate agenda. At one point, some people here probably remember one of the male leaders of the New Left, and frankly, I couldn't come up with his name. He made a statement that really reverberated, which was that the theoretical task of the New Left was to analyze and name the system. He was trying to connect American policy in Vietnam with race and class politics. And the sort of socialist feminist strand that I came from in women's liberation was trying to do that by integrating gender and sexual politics into it also without losing any of those other aspects of the analysis. And I think that many, many different groups were all trying to do that in different ways, and many of them were represented by presentations here, from neighborhood community organizing to protesting the pollution of Love Canal, to anti-war marches, from the Young Lords to the Women of All Red Nations, from the Bronx to San Diego. I think the women's liberation movement on the whole added two very important theoretical perspectives to that mix. One, about gender, that gender is not a characteristic of individual people. And you know, a lot of people, even some of my most sophisticated colleagues, sort of use the idea of gender as the socially constructed differences between men and women, whereas I think what the women's movement showed us is that gender is an overall system. It was once called a sex-gender system by Gail Rubin many decades ago, and that it is a system that we all live in, whether we like it or not. The second, I think, major contribution of feminist theory was, of course, the famous slogan that the personal is political and that power invades all parts of life. And I think we would do well to keep both those things in mind, but I want to come back to Wendy Davis for just a moment. I actually think it's very important to admire and honor individual women like her, who defied and transcended the constraints of womanhood and achieved big things. I am not arguing that we should not honor people like that. I think that our pride and our aspirations and our capacity for organizing depends on treasuring the heroes that we have. If for no other reason than just to demonstrate that talent is not a male monopoly. Besides, and this is something I've only started thinking since the beginning of this conference, I think the tendency that we had, and it was very strong earlier in the 70s, certainly in me, the tendency to reject female heroes may also reflect our very exaggerated fear of leadership that we had, a lot of us, in the women's movement. We were part of a new left that really wanted to break with Stalinism and its authoritarian leadership. That was absolutely right. And furthermore, as women, we had experienced so much reactionary authority directed against us, telling us what to do. We wanted radical equality. And as a result, in some of our groups, we not only trashed women who tried to take leadership, but we failed to train each other in leadership skills so that a democratic leadership could be forged. I think that there's some evidence that the Chicago Women's Liberation Union did a lot better than we did in Bread and Roses with trying that. And I would hope that we now understand that we do need leaders, but we can't get leaders who are accountable if we deny the value of having leaders in the first place. But even as I'm saying why we need to have heroes, I do think we have to remember the main issues, or the system, as the New Left called it. We just cannot allow people to assume that every time women get to be CEOs or politicians, that it does the 99% of us any good. I want to just cite one particular thing that really pissed me off, which was when Emily's List supported Christine Quinn for mayor of New York. Now, Christine Quinn is both a woman and a lesbian, but she opposed a city regulation that required employers to provide sick leave, and she functioned as the darling of the big developers who build luxury housing and force low and middle income people out of the city. Now, what could be a more fundamental women's issue than sick leave or affordable housing? It doesn't have the name woman attached to it, but it's very, very fundamental to who we are as women. That doesn't mean it's not fundamental to men also, but I'll leave that aside for the moment. By contrast, the male New York City mayor, Bill de Blasio, pushed through a sick leave requirement. He appointed a feminist commissioner of health who created an office on domestic violence, and he's struggling for affordable housing, which he may or may not be able to do. So just to repeat the obvious, we really must not assume that the policies most valuable to women will have women or gender in their names. Our movements that we're talking about here, the women's liberation movement, was part of the left, and I hope that our movements will continue to remain there. Women's liberation was not fundamentally about equality. Equality in theory could mean equality in racial discrimination, equality in poverty, equality in poor education, equality in being spied on by the NSA, even equality in invading other countries. But I just want to say that we actually have some evidence that kind of transformative rather than equality vision really continues to have influence. One of the things we know from some sociologists who've studied this is that to a very remarkable extent, veterans of the New Left and of the women's movement, as they aged, continued to make choices about occupations in which they were trying to do their bit for social change. There have really been a lot of surveys that show that. And though I'm not a great fan of polls, I went back and I studied the Pew Research polls from the most recent date that I could get really the fine breakdowns that I wanted, and that was from 2010. There is a huge sex difference in opinion, and that sex difference applies to all the following issues. I'm going to read them all. The Iraq War, gun control, torture, the death penalty, drones, homeland security, civil liberties, welfare, poverty, race, education, global warming, and a few more. On all of those issues, women of all classes are to the left of the men in their same class. And sometimes this difference reaches 20 points or 20% difference. This is it's not everything, but it's as they like to say in statistics, it's a robust finding. And I don't think we can explain this by the simple fact that women are still discriminated against, because actually, as a historian, I can tell you about many situations in which people who are downtrodden actually cling to very, very conservative values. I think it's the opposite, that this movement had that kind of effect. I'm just going to close with one small little historical lesson. The old left made a really, really bad mistake in Europe and in the US, but it wasn't so costly. They tried to fight off fascism in Germany by non-cooperation with other progressive groups that they considered not sufficiently revolutionary. And they even have a slogan that some of you may have heard: the worse, the better. The idea was that the worse conditions got for people in Germany, the more revolutionary they would become. Well, that was a disaster. We know that. And I actually think the better, the better. And what I mean by that is something that I think Tess Ewing expressed very well this morning, that I think another part of our mistake early on was being too disdainful of what we then called liberal or reformist kind of struggles. That we just have to chip away at the bad things and try to climb to make things slightly better. And what I mean by saying the better is that I actually think that as people gain things, they begin to demand even more things. And that's absolutely what we want. So I'm just going to stop there. Thank you all for listening. Thank you.
So we have time for some questions. I said that before I looked at my watch, but we do. We have time for some questions.
Or comments,
Or
or
comments.
arguments, or anything people want to say.
We have a half hour until this, 32 minutes till the singing? Okay.
Linda, is the new left over, and if it is, what is it now?
Okay, so we'll repeat the question. Is the new left over? And if it is, what is it now?
Yeah, I think it's over.
Now that I'm part of a progressive movement,
Yeah.
I want to know the.
You'll have to name it yourself. I mean, we historians, if the New Left was continuing and continuing, then it would not be an historical thing that we could look at. And I think we would all agree that there was a period in which there was a really, really big uptick in people mobilized for progressive causes that started with the civil rights movement. I think that's sort of baseline, something that historians agree on.
Hi, Linda. Judy Gumbo Albert here.
Hi.
Hi. You said that the New Left was not fundamentally about equality. What would you say it was about?
That the New Left was not guided.
I'm sorry. I mean the women's liberation movement was not fundamentally about equality.
Well, let me just clarify. We certainly would have liked to see equality, but we were not only about equality. We wanted a larger transformation of the whole society. In other words, we didn't want to accept the pie and just take a slightly larger piece of it. And I think there were quite a number of issues on which there was actually real debate, even about certain, there was not clear that all people in the women's liberation movement wanted women to be drafted. It was not clear that women were willing to give up maternity leave in order to have an equal rights amendment, because the fact is that the vast, vast majority of childcare is done by women, not to mention the physical labor of carrying and giving birth to children.
Right. So basically you're saying that it was the larger context, the larger issues in which we were fighting, but that it had a specific effect on women as women. Is that right? I'm just trying to get a little clarity.
Well, I can say that, I think that the women's movement, it's hard for me to think of issues that didn't have a particular effect on women. And, for example, people who went to Vietnam were very, very moved by Vietnamese women, but I think if you could imagine an attack on a country that didn't have any women, we still would have been against it. So I don't want to say that it was only about women. And we certainly were concerned about issues that have to do with children of both sexes.
I am from Germany, and I'm a little bit surprised that I think you opposed your own analysis when you say, I have to say there are feminists everywhere, there are skinhead feminists even, or conservative feminists. I'm surprised because in your talking then, you qualified like Kristen Quinn not to be seen as a feminist for whom you would have voted. And I give an example from Germany. I think Angela Merkel, she is the most powerful politician of the world, they say. She's not a feminist. And I think we should say this. She's not a feminist and she doesn't support women. But she is supportive in the imagination for all little children that you can become a chancellor. But that is something else. I wouldn't call her therefore a feminist. She isn't, because she is opposing feminism. And you did it in your own lecture. And why not to dare to qualify feminism for the political fights we have to do?
Do you understand that point? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time following your... What? No, it isn't that. It isn't. Can you try to say it again right here, and I'll repeat it. Yeah. Sure.
I think it's because when you talked, you referred to skinhead feminists and whereas conservative
Well, first of all, I've read some about the skinheads, because I was recently writing something about that, and there are skinheads who call themselves feminists, and who argue that they believe in equality between men and women. So I'm not here to say they're not feminist. What I was saying is that the women's liberation movement, which was a particular moment in the history of feminism, had a far more global and transformational ideology. But I just don't want us, I'm personally opposed to this idea that we can give an imprimatur to the word feminism and decide when it should be used and when it shouldn't.
Yeah, but a skinhead feminist will probably discriminate all the other feminists in other words, from other races, from classes, and that can't be called a feminist, only that she wants to be equal with her.
No, I understand that, but it would be wonderful if skinhead is a very extreme example. It would be wonderful if all feminists were completely, not only anti-racist, but completely devoid of racism. But that is not, in fact, true, right? In other words, I don't want to say that a feminist is someone who has to have a kind of purity of correct line in every part of their political thought.
Yes, my name is Donna Smith. I don't have a question, I have more of a comment. This was fabulous. I think we all agree that sisterhood is powerful and inspiring, and I want to ask everyone in the room to give some thought as you head home about just how you intend to turn that power and inspiration into action for women. And no matter how large or small, that your action at this time is very important to all of us. Thank you.
Let me just add one thing about the feminist thing, because speaking as an historian, perhaps I can be clear. We need to understand a long history of feminism. In the 19th century, we had many women's rights advocates who I consider feminists. They were, many of them, quite racist. They never for a moment thought that men should share in housework. Many of them were absolutely opposed to what we would call birth control. But if we say that they were not feminists, then we are cutting off a part of our historical legacy. Feminism is not only varied, but it changes historically. And I don't think we should use the word as a marker of good or bad, right? It is a description of people who believe that there ought to be advancement for women. 19th century feminists did not believe in equality. They just wanted women to move up.
Hi, my name is Barbara Simonetti, and first I'd like to thank you for pointing out the male corporate names on buildings in New York. It really helps me understand better the gut-wrenching feeling I get when I walk into the planetarium that's now named for the Koch brothers. They bought it. What I really want to bring up is this issue of, I come from the field of dialogue and deliberation, and a lot of the work we're doing is trying to figure out how do you get people who are standing on different places into civil dialogue so we can move forward together. I've heard a lot about the lean-in group, and it almost feels like an us and them. And yet it is the place where, did someone say it was 1,400 or 14,000 groups, leaned-in groups have been formed? So women are gathering, and it's not our conscious-raising groups, but they're gathering. And they're having a conversation because they know something's wrong. So what I'd like to propose is, and ask, is what would it mean if we all decided to join one of those leaned-in groups and put our voices in that conversation?
And we number before one in each.
Okay. My name is Sansara Taylor. I write for Revolution newspaper, and I work with StopPatriarchy.org. And I want to, since it's the closing plenary, I wanted to come back to something Sarah Evans said in the opening, which was, she said it's very hard to convey to young people today what it felt like back at the height of the women's liberation movement, and how much people really believed that they were going to change the whole world and the whole world could change. And she said you could go to sleep one night and think it would be totally different the next day, and that revolution was not only possible, but imminent. And I've been thinking about that since yesterday morning, and what I want to say is that just because it didn't happen, we can't be determinist about history. Just because it didn't happen, just because revolution was not made, does not mean it was not possible. And just because it didn't happen then and hasn't happened since does not mean it's not possible today, and that it's not even more needed today than ever before.
I think, we've heard this lecture before in other panels, so maybe you could be
I will be very brief, and I will say that people who still yearn for actual liberation and know that that can't come as long as this system of capitalism, imperialism is riding high, come and get serious and be part of fighting this. Join the movement for revolution and be part of building resistance, not elections.
I think you should
Not
let someone
elections.
else have the mic, please.
I will, but
Please.
Oh, cut it off again. Cut it off again. Is it history or does this matter today? It still matters today. You can censor it if you want, but
it does matter today. Okay.
Thanks, Linda. Keep asking your question.
Hi. My name is Deborah Gerson. Is the mic off?
Mic's off.
It is on. Oh, now it is.
Thank you.
Okay. My name is Deborah Gerson. I'm from San Francisco. And I want to reflect back on, Linda said, what she's seen happen in the last 30 years, and Susan Faludi talked to this also, this massive transfer of wealth from the working and middle classes to the top 1%, and we know it's even worse. It's the top 1/2 of 1%, 1/10 of 1%. As this happens around us, and we see our cities, our communities, our safety net being totally eroded, and we know that every time there's a transfer of resources and wealth, it affects women worse. Is there a way to leverage that understanding? I want to ask another old Marxist question. What is to be done? I don't know. I'm in San Francisco where we're having this anti-displacement coalition, tenants movement, largest outpouring we've seen in years, a 400-person convention, a lot of activity. Nonetheless, the displacement of working class and middle class people, often people of color, continues happening in our cities. Is there a way to put women in some special place, to give us a certain leverage in that struggle? Is there a potential socialist feminist synthesis awaiting us who can see these class forces at work? So that's a question I have for all of us, not just for Linda. Sort of the what is to be done in this moment, and what are people doing? I'd love to hear.
Hi, Linda, I had another question. Do you want to answer hers, or would you like to?
I don't have.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you, Linda, for fighting to grow your mind and develop your mind for us. And I knew you in Bread and Roses, and I know you now, and I'm very proud of you, so thank you. The question I have is, one of the big changing moments in my life was Bread and Roses, but as we didn't stop there. And I began to travel throughout the world and meet women in different places, and went to some international women's conferences and so on. So I'd love to know what your thinking is about the relationship of our organizing as women in this country, which is the oppressor, wealthier nation, with the women and their struggles from the oppressed nations of the world.
Well, I suspect that you could answer that better than me, and a lot of people could. In some ways, I think that the main spark or leadership of a lot of what's happening has moved from this country to a lot of the countries in the global south. And I think that's partly because in countries where, there are plenty of poor people in this country, but you have countries where poverty is the condition of a far greater proportion of people, I think the women's movements have from the beginning understood that, again, as I put it, these causes that don't have the name women attached to them may be their priorities. Women who are fighting against the IMF austerity budgets, which force cutbacks in health care for children or in cutbacks in education or raise the price of getting your children educated, that these may be the priority women's struggles. And I think that we can learn a lot from those kind of priorities. But I also totally know that there are going to be the same kinds of divisions. In Egypt, where a lot of women are beginning to raise a challenge to sexual harassment and sexual assault, there are other women in other situations who are going to say, no, that's just a middle-class cause, right? So I don't think for any reason, by any moment, excuse me, I'm getting my words mixed up. I don't think that we can assume that other countries are going to escape the kinds of divisions and conflicts within women's movements that we have had. But I certainly think that a lot of American people active in women's movements have learned the lesson that we should not assume that we are in a teaching position in relation to women's activism in other parts of the world.
Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it. I do have a couple of, differences. And one of them is that I think in terms of what I thought the women's liberation movement brought that the left did not, was that there was a demand in the left for equal share of resources and wealth. And feminism brought the equal share of resources, wealth, and power. And the power analysis was pretty quintessential for the women's liberation movement, which I think the left did not do adequately in terms of women. On that note, you said that you were hoping that we would always be part of the new left in terms of the women's liberation movement. For me, I always want to be independent and not a subset of any other movement. I think the women's liberation movement obviously should do coalition work, and there isn't any issue, I think, that doesn't involve the needs and issues of women. But for me, as a radical feminist, it's very important that we stand independent and autonomous. And I'm not sure if I misunderstood you or if I don't understand the history in America well enough, but for me, that's a crucial difference.
Well, I don't agree with you when you say that other parts of the left weren't concerned with power. Movements of national liberation were absolutely concerned with power. Movements against racial discrimination were absolutely concerned with power. White working class people had to fight for the right to vote. That's about power. I don't think you should reduce the what?
The difference between the power between men and women, not
well,
just
that's by definition, that's what feminism is. But when I say I think it should be part of the left, I just mean that again, it's my critique of a strictly equal rights feminism. That's just not good enough for me. It doesn't interest me as much as a more transformative agenda.
Hi, it's not really a question, but a small comment for the sake of historical preciseness. I have to say I'm quite shocked that, and it has been repeated, that skinhead is automatically linked with racism. Just to say, skinhead is not a dirty word. Skinhead is a proletarian movement that was raised in England in the beginning of the 60s. That was first anti-racial, racist. It was linked with a lot of Jamaican immigration. It was detrimental in development of vegan politics, anti-sexist politics, autonomous anarchist spaces, communist organization, punk movement, ska music movement. It's a really, really interesting history. Of course, it has turned to, let's say in a second moment, some neo-Nazi derivation, but also communist and anarchist derivation. And I think it's really interesting to know about this history and not to presume it's all the same, because it's still influential today into movements that are still our allies for me. So yeah, that's what I want to say.
I wasn't really sure that.
Well, I think we could just say that there's so much that the audience has to teach us, coming from the different countries and places people have. There's so, and also so many insights about the unfinished work of feminism. So we should think about this as these comments and questions in that spirit, I think.
I want to thank Linda for the way she placed the current struggle. I think that one of the differences between the birth of the New Left and what we're faced with today is that we're no longer in an expansionary period of worldwide capitalist expansion. We're in a period of capitalist decline. And the reason why we have the far right acting up so much, and the reason why we have the corporate elite being so conservative about everything, is that they know that this system is being delegitimized across the world. And I think that the women's movement, men and women, need to take this moment. This is the woman's moment right now, because look at it. We need women's leadership at this point in time, because it is women who have another type of leadership to offer the world. And like Linda and many people have said today, we're learning about that leadership from other countries, but let's look at our own country. Right now, the people who are hurt the most are women of color, whether they are African American, whether they're Latina, or whatever. And we also have tremendous leadership available to us from women of color. These are folks that some of whom are sitting in the room today, some of whom are in all of our communities, right and left. And I think it's very important that we go away from this meeting today and we begin to build those bridges. If those bridges haven't already been built, and I know that many of us here have incredible bridges to communities of color. It's the Black women, the Latinas, the Asian women, and the white working class and middle class women who care about dealing with the corporate situation that we have today. And I think that the way in which that's being felt is through the failure of the healthcare system, the failure of the welfare system, the failure of jobs, the failure of childcare, et cetera. These are women's areas. It's time we took leadership. We are the leaders for the moment today. We need to step up.
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment. I have an original comment, and then as I'm listening to people speak, including you, and I really enjoyed your speech, but can we please stop pandering to the men by saying, of the women and a few men can take care of themselves. We don't need to acknowledge them anymore. I don't even know what they're doing here. They should be wearing signs explaining to us what they're doing here. And secondly, I just wanted to say that although I really enjoyed your speech, I was disappointed of how you spoke to Ms. Taylor, because I didn't think there was any requirement that we not repeat ourselves as something that's been said before. I mean, women are not incubators. We can't say that enough times. There are many things we can't say enough times. And it kind of reminded me of a man saying, yeah, I heard that before, shut up, lady. So I hope that doesn't happen again. Thank you.
Hi, I love your speech. I was wondering about, in the process of organizing for social change, for gender equality, how you feel it most effective to get people to feel empathy for oppression?
Oh, that's really an interesting question. I actually I thought about it a lot recently in another medium, because I wrote about a photographer, Dorothea Lange, who was a master at, I think, trying to communicate that. But at the same time, I'm not sure that what we need most is empathy toward oppression, as opposed to a kind of respect for and confident and instilling confidence that people can actually make change. Because I think, a lot of people have a lot of complaints about what's wrong with this country, and they understand that people suffer. But a lot of the attitude is that's just the way the world is. You can't change things. There's that problem of resignation. And then, of course, occasionally there's the problem, if you really worked hard and were really good at what you could do, you wouldn't, I'm not talking about people who have illness or, or so-called natural disasters. So I'm not an expert, because it's kind of a psychological question that you're asking, but I also just wanted to say that I think feeling sorry for people or empathy is not the only thing we need to do. We also need that buoyancy of spirit and hopefulness that people can actually take action.
I don't really mean feeling sorry for people, because that's sympathy. Empathy is literally feeling the similar pain. And what I mean by that distinction is that I think the people who are oppressed, and that encompasses women and a wide variety of minorities, clearly feel enough pain that they can resist, and they can personally express that. And they frequently, as we can see with all of the people here, at one point can be empowered by that and move and create action. And I think that if you can get I just think that if you can get other people to feel that similar emotion, then you can get them to affect change.
Well, I think you're answering part of it in just what you said, which is that one of the best things that can happen is for people to join together with other people and not to be isolated.
And whatever helps them do that, that's a good thing. We'll just have time for one more question. And so.
I'll have the last word. So I want to answer this young man's question more than a friend of mine who works a great deal about anti-feminism and men and feminism. He suggests that men, and I would extend that to every person who's an oppressor, might be oppressed, but also oppressor in some situations, that these people disempower themselves, okay, whether it be momentarily or on the longer term. And I think men, if they want to be allies in the feminist struggle, sure they can show some empathy, but they should, within a framework of power relations, rapport de sexe, they should disempower themselves. And that's what we should do also when we have some privilege. So look at what the privileges that they have, how they gain from women's oppression, and how as white women, for example, we gain on oppression of racialized people, and how you people on a stage who have teachers' positions and have a series of privilege, you tend to shut down young women who call for revolution, I find is very mind-troubling. And I hope you won't mind this from someone from another country, but I find it's very violent that you would shut up this young woman several times within the 2-3 days that I was here. I find it's it's bothering me, and I don't know about the politics, the internal thing that's going on there. And also what bothers me is that there's not enough racialized people in this conference. There was not enough on stage, not within participants, and the question of indigenous women was not a matter that was discussed, and I think it's very crucial.
Whether you're going to take me or not. Will you take me?
Well, obviously feminism is unfinished and needs to go on. I do want to say one thing just about the history of our movement. The woman that was giving a talk that people were not happy with is from a sectarian Marxist-Leninist group with which the women's liberation movement had a long, long experience of those groups essentially trying to destroy the women's movement, to use it as a recruiting ground. So you may not agree, but I just want you to understand that it comes out of a long shared history that people have. I do want to say one last thing about men. Two things, one that's from my experience and one is as an historian. From my experience, I actually have this impression that men who are more happy with egalitarianism are actually happier and enjoy themselves more. But let me point out something else. Historically, one of the things I once studied was domestic violence and wife beating. And in most countries all over the world for a very long time, men were actually legally entitled to beat up their wives, but most of them did not. And when you try to understand why that happens, one of the things you understand is that relationships that are more companionate actually work better and are actually more rewarding to people. Not everyone knows that or experiences it, but I think on the whole, it's surprising how many men do. And part of the early conflicts between what in this country we're called radical feminists and in this country we're called socialist feminists. I mean, these are things that sort of have faded now, was that I think radical feminists were more pessimistic that men could not change. And I think I was always on the more optimistic side, and maybe it's just because of the men I happen to know, but it seemed to me that a lot of men were in fact changing.
Let me just close this session by saying that we've seen a part of women's liberation in action. We've seen disagreements, we've seen challenges, we've seen a wide range of comments.
If you want to oppose the views, then do it with substance
Okay.
and content.
That's okay. But this session is now over because we have a chance to sing, and another group is taking over the room.
Yes, and I have one quick announcement. One quick announcement before our wonderful singers come on. And that is that I know it's been a long day and a long conference, but we have a spectacular evening of film starting at 7:30 in the conference auditorium around the corner, and we'll hope to see many of you there.
Hi, we're going to have a little bit of a sing-along, 3 songs, and then we'll maybe stick around. But these are all songs from the Boston and also international. I'm Marcia Deihl, Deborah Silverstein is to my left, and we were in the New Harmony Sisterhood Band in Boston. We met 40 years ago, and these are the songs we sang, and unfortunately, they're still very needed and true today. They all have sing-along choruses, so if you are so moved, please do that and sing along.
Sing along is part of our movement. Come on now.
We were just swaying and holding hands in Kristen's concert, 20-year-olds with 70-year-olds, and I have to tell you, I got a tear for the vibe of those days. I also have a slideshow of a lot of slides from that era. So,
could I have some more voice, please?
And this is Kristen Lems.
Hello. Yay. Deborah Silverstein and Marcia Deihl. Here we go with Still Ain't Satisfied.
Well, they got women on TV, but I still ain't satisfied. 'Cause co-optation's all I see, and I still ain't satisfied. They call me Miss, they sell me blue jeans, call it women's lib. They make it sound obscene, and I still ain't. Oh, they lie, and I still ain't. Oh, they lie. What they do? Whoa, they lied, and I still ain't satisfied. Well, they got women prison guards, and I still ain't satisfied. With so many still behind bars, and I still ain't satisfied. I don't plead guilt. I don't want no bum deal. I ain't asking for crumbs. I want the whole meal, and I still ain't. Oh, they lie. And I still ain't. Oh, they lie. And I still ain't. Whoa, they lied, and I still ain't satisfied. They liberalized abortion, and I still ain't satisfied. 'Cause it still costs a fortune, and I still ain't satisfied. If you can get it at all, I'm singing about control of my own womb. And no reform or overturn is gonna change my tune. And I still ain't. Oh, they lie. And I still ain't. Oh, they lie. Oh, they lie. And I still ain't satisfied. Well, they got unisex fashion shows, and I still ain't satisfied. For all the dykes that no one knows, and I still ain't satisfied. They say, okay, we'll sell the butch look, but they don't put queers back in the history books. And I still ain't. Whoa, they lie. And I still ain't. Whoa, they lie. And I still ain't. Whoa, they lied. And I still ain't satisfied. Well, this world sure don't look my way, and I still ain't satisfied. 'Cause women get raped every day, I still ain't satisfied. They say too bad, put up a street light. But they get uptight when we learn to street fight. And I still ain't. Oh, they lied, I still ain't. Oh, they lied, I still ain't. Oh, they lied, and I still ain't satisfied. I got some pride, I won't be lied to. I did decide that halfway won't do. And I still ain't. Oh, they lied. And I still ain't. Oh, they lied. And I still ain't. Oh, they lied. And I still ain't satisfied. Woo!
Next,
we have the slideshow. Start the slideshow back there. Jeff, was that it?
That was nice. We saw a lot of you moving your mouths.
So next in your little book is Bella Ciao, and singing along is the preferred mode of participation.
Could I have a little more guitar, please?
We are the women, and we are marching. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. We are marching for liberation. We want the revolution now. Enslaved by bosses and chained by housework. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. We see so clearly that things need changing. We'll start the revolution now. We've got a vision of free, strong women. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. We're to keep our future. We'll make the revolution now. We've all been brainwashed to be dependent. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. We don't need marriage. We don't need husbands to fight the revolution now. We won't be victims of the profit motive. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. We are not objects. We are not products. We're making revolution now. And all our children will be well cared for.
are the women. First verse. And we are marching.
What are we doing? Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. What are we marching for? Liberation. We'll start the revolution now. We are marching for liberation. We'll start the revolution now. So we are all on the same page after all.
So this is Battle Hymn of Women.
Battle Hymn of the Women to the tune of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which was sung on the march in 1971 that created the Cambridge Women's Center.
Yeah, that's
all right. You want it? Oh, sorry. All right, sorry. Here we go.
little chord change.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the flame of women's rage. It's smoldering through centuries, now burning in this age. We no longer will be prisoners in that same old gilded cage. That's why we're marching on. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. Move on over, or we'll move on over. Don't lean in, move over. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. For women's time has come. You have told us to speak softly, to be gentle, and to smile. Expected us to change ourselves with every passing style. Said the only work for women was to clean and type and file. That's why we're marching on. All together. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. For women's time has come. It is we who've done your cooking, done your cleaning, kept your rules. We gave birth to all your children, and we taught them in your schools. We've kept the system running, but we're laying down our tools. For we are marching on. All together. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. For women's time has come. You think that you can buy us off with crummy wedding rings. You never pay us half the profit that our labor brings. Our anger eats into us. We no longer bow to kings. For we are marching on. Let's march together. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. For the women's time has come. We have broken through our shackles. Now we sing a battle song. We march for liberation, and we're many thousand strong. We'll build a new society. We've waited much too long. Now we are marching on. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. For we are marching on.
Please join us in this song, We Will Never Give Up. Hope that you sang it at a rally in the past. Maybe you'll sing it at a rally in the future. And if you were in my little mini set earlier, you've already had a chance to try it. And then we're going to close things up. I am asking everything you have to give. I am asking everything you have to give. Everybody up. We will never give up. We will never give up. We will never give in. We will never give in. Try it. We will never give up. We will never give up. We will never give in. We will never give in. You have to learn the way this works. You stand up, grab the hand of your sister or brother, and sway. It's some kind of radical waltz. You can use your youth, your sleep, your arches, your strength, your patience, your sense of humor.
Oh, give it up. Come on. What else can you do this?
The help and support of people you love very much. But you know what? We will never give up. We will never give up. We will never give in. We will never give in. We will never give up. We will never give up. We will never give in. Don't you know we'll never give in? In return, I have nothing to offer you but this. In return, I have nothing to offer you but this. Your pride in being a woman. All the dreams that you have for your daughters. Your pride in being a woman. All the dreams that you have for yourself. We will never give up. We will never give up. We will never give in. We will never give in. We will never give up. We will never give up. We will never give in. We will never give in. And the knowledge that at the end of your days you will be able to look back and say, with a knowledge at the end of your days, you will be able to look back and say, I never gave up. I never gave up. I never gave in. We never gave up. We never gave up. We never gave in. We will never give up. We will never give up. We will never give in. Don't you know we'll never give in again? We will never give up. We will never give up. We will never give in. We will never give. Hold your parts now. For you. We will never give up. We will never give in. We will never give in. Louder. We will never give up. We will never give up. We will never give in. We will never give in. We will never give up. We will never give up. We will never give in. Don't you know we'll never give in? We will never give up. We will never give up. We will never give in until justice is ours.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't give up.